When I told my parents I bought my first house, they laughed at me and claimed it had to be a cheap little shack. Can you imagine spending your entire life being told you're nothing, your every dream ridiculed, your accomplishments belittled? I lived that reality. But what happens when you finally get the chance to serve up the ultimate, most devastating dose of comeuppance? That night, I didn't just prove them wrong. I broke them. And it felt like the most intoxicating, heart-wrenching victory of my life. You see, my entire life, my parents had just one hobby, mocking me. If I succeeded at something, they'd shrink it down to nothing. If I dared to fail, they'd make sure I knew they'd seen it coming, a smug "I told you so" etched on their faces. Nothing I ever did was good enough. So, when I finally announced I had bought my first house, I didn't expect congratulations. I didn't expect pride. Honestly, I didn't expect anything except the usual sneer, the casual dismissal. And sure enough, there they were, leaning back in their chairs, chuckling. "What is it, some tiny, ugly dump?" they sneered, shaking their heads. Let me guess, a rundown shack in the middle of nowhere. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even try to explain. I just smiled, a slow, cold smile, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the table. "What's this?" they asked, raising skeptical eyebrows. "An invitation," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. "Housewarming party next Saturday." They scoffed, tossing the envelope aside like it was junk mail. Yeah, we'll be there," they muttered, clearly annoyed. "Might as well see what kind of mess you got yourself into this time." I just kept smiling. Because this time it was different. This time I wasn't the one who would be embarrassed. This time it was their turn to be speechless. The week leading up to that party felt utterly surreal. My whole life, I'd been trying to prove myself to people who never, ever believed in me. But this time? This wasn't about seeking approval anymore. This was about delivering a lesson. A final, incredibly satisfying lesson. This housewarming wasn't just some casual gathering. Oh no. It was going to be an event. And my new home? It wasn't just a house. It was the house. A sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. The kind of place my parents had always dreamed of living in, but never could. And I had done it without them. In spite of them. I sent out the invitations, not just to family and old friends, but to key people from work, the influential ones. I made sure every single detail was perfect. Caterers, live music, even valet parking. If they thought I had bought some rundown shack, they were in for the shock of their lives. But then, something interesting started happening. The calls began. First, it was my aunt. She'd never been outright cruel, not like my parents, but she was definitely complicit, always standing by, letting them tear me down. "Hey, sweetie," she purred, that overly sweet voice she used when she wanted something already dripping with fake concern. "Your parents said you bought a house. That's so nice. Where is it?" I could practically hear the skepticism in her voice. She wasn't asking out of excitement, she was fishing for something, anything, to criticize. "I sent an invitation," I said simply. "You'll see." A pause. Then a hesitant, awkward laugh. "You know, your parents are just teasing, right? They only want what's best for you. Right? Because ridiculing your child's every accomplishment is the hallmark of good parenting," I thought, a bitter laugh bubbling up inside me. "I guess we'll find out next Saturday," I said, and ended the call before she could keep going. Then, 2 days before the party, my parents called. That was rare. They never called unless they had something insulting to say. "What's the deal with this address?" they demanded. "This isn't some mistake, is it?" "No mistake," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "That's my house." Silence. Then a short, scoffing laugh. "Yeah, okay. You expect us to believe that?" "I don't expect anything," I said, still smiling to myself. "Just show up." I could almost feel the doubt creeping into their voices, the uncertainty. They had spent their whole lives believing I was beneath them. The idea that I could have done something this big, something they never could, was scrambling their minds. Good. This was just the beginning. The day of the party arrived, and everything was set. The driveway of my mansion, yes, an actual mansion, was already lined with luxury cars. The kind of cars my parents used to point out in magazines, saying, "That's real success, not whatever nonsense you're doing." Valets in crisp uniforms took guest keys as they arrived. Inside, head caterers moved smoothly through the grand entryway, offering champagne and canapés on silver trays. The chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow, and soft jazz played in the background. Every single detail screamed wealth, power, success. And then, they arrived. I saw my parents step out of their aging sedan, looking around in utter confusion. My aunt was right behind them, clutching her purse like she'd accidentally wandered into the wrong neighborhood. They stared up at the house, their jaws tightening. This was not what they expected. Not even close. I walked out onto the front steps, taking my time. I wanted to see the exact moment they realized just how wrong they had been about me. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice cool and casual, almost bored. "Welcome to my home." They blinked. Their mouths opened slightly, but no words came out. For the very first time in my life, my parents were speechless. I led them inside, where guests were already mingling. Some of them were people my parents used to admire from afar. A well-known businessman shook my hand. An investment mogul I had worked with patted me on the back. My parents knew these faces. They had talked about these people, often with a hint of longing. But now? I was the one among them. "Come on in," I said smoothly. "Make yourselves comfortable." They followed stiffly, their eyes darting around, taking in everything. The soaring ceilings, the modern art, the sweeping staircase that led to the second floor. My aunt was silent, gripping their arms like she needed something solid to hold on to. And then, as if on cue, one of my staff members approached. "Sir," the man said respectfully, "would you like me to take your coats?" My parents turned, completely stunned. "Staff? I had staff?" They hesitated, then mutely handed over their coats, their hands slightly unsteady. They still hadn't spoken a single word. I had dreamed of this moment. Lived for it. The years of humiliation, the mockery, the dismissive smirks, it had all led to this. And I wasn't done yet. "Let's have a drink," I said, leading them into the lounge. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and gestured for them to sit. They lowered themselves into the plush leather chairs, still looking utterly dazed. I took the seat across from them, swirling my drink slowly before taking a sip. Then I leaned forward, locking eyes with them. "You always told me I'd be nothing," I said quietly, each word a slow, deliberate strike. "You laughed at me, humiliated me, made me feel worthless." Their faces twitched. Their fingers clenched against the armrests. "But look around." I gestured at the house, the guests, the success dripping from every corner of the room. "I built this without you. In spite of you." They inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, but they still didn't speak. Because for the first time in my life, they had nothing to say. And I wasn't finished. I let the silence stretch between us, savoring it. For years, they had filled every quiet moment with criticism, every achievement with backhanded remarks. But now? They were just sitting there, gripping the chairs like they needed to hold on to something solid to keep from dissolving. I took another slow sip of my whiskey. "What's wrong?" I asked, tilting my head, a smirk playing on my lips. "Not what you were expecting?" They swallowed hard. "This?" My father cleared his throat, his voice rough. "This isn't yours." I smirked again. "Oh?" They shook their heads. "You didn't do this on your own." There it was. The last desperate grasp at control. The idea that I, the child they spent their lives mocking, could have achieved all this without them, it was too much for them to process. I leaned back, letting my glass rest on the table. "Tell yourselves whatever you want," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "But the reality is right in front of you." I gestured around the room. "I built this life. You had nothing to do with it." Their faces darkened, but before they could say anything, my aunt finally spoke. "We She glanced around, her voice small, almost a whisper. We didn't know you were doing so well. I raised an eyebrow. No, I said, my voice flat. You didn't. Because you never cared to ask. She flinched. My parents just clenched their jaws, their pride fighting against the obvious truth staring them in the face. And then I went for the final blow. I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough to make it intimately personal. I invited you here for one reason, I said, my tone like steel. So you could see what you'll never be a part of. My parents' eyes widened. This is my life now, I continued. And you? I smiled coldly. You're nothing to me. Their hands curled into fists, their faces turning red. You ungrateful little, I lifted a hand, cutting them off. I said calmly. Then I turned slightly and made a small, almost imperceptible motion with my fingers. Security stepped forward. Two large men in suits approached smoothly, positioning themselves just behind my parents. My parents blinked, their mouths opening slightly in shock. You're done here, I said, my voice firm. Escort them out and make sure they never set foot on my property again. My aunt gasped. Wait, no. No, I said, my voice rock solid. I spent years putting up with their garbage. Years of being laughed at, disrespected, made to feel like nothing. I stared directly at my parents. Not anymore. The guards stepped forward. They looked between the guards and me, breathing heavily. Their faces were a raw mix of rage, humiliation, and something else, something that almost looked like defeat. But they didn't fight it. They stood slowly, straightened their jackets, and gave me one last, hateful look. Then they turned and walked out. I exhaled, letting the full weight of the moment settle. For the first time ever, I had the power. And my parents? They were nothing more than a bad memory. One that would never haunt me again. As the door shut behind them, a quiet ripple went through the room. A few guests glanced over, curious, but polite enough not to ask. The music played on. The clinking of glasses continued. And just like that, they were gone. I exhaled slowly, feeling something in my chest unravel. For years, I had carried their words, their mockery, their doubts. But now, they were out of my house, out of my life. And for the first time ever, I felt truly, completely free. I turned back to my guests, plastering on an easy smile. Well, I said, raising my glass. Now that the entertainment is over, let's enjoy the night. A few chuckles, a clink of drinks, and just like that, the celebration continued. But deep down, I knew this night wasn't just about the party. It was about winning. And I had won. As the night went on, I found myself stepping away from the party, out onto the grand balcony overlooking the city skyline. The air was cool, crisp, carrying the distant hum of life below. Inside, my guests laughed and talked, the warmth of success wrapping around them like a comfortable embrace. But I needed a moment. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the lights. It still didn't feel real. Not just the house, the wealth, or the event, but the silence. For the first time in my life, my parents' voices weren't in my head, whispering doubts, tearing me down. They were gone for good. I should have felt pure relief, pure victory. And in a way, I did. But there was something else, too. Something heavier. Because beneath all the satisfaction, there was a part of me that had once wanted them to be proud. It wasn't just about proving them wrong. A long time ago, before I truly understood who they were, I had wanted them to see my worth, to recognize that I had worked, that I had fought, that I had built something incredible. But tonight made it clear, they never would. And that, I realized, was their loss. I took a deep breath, letting the thought settle, and then I let it go. I had spent too much of my life chasing validation from people who never deserved that power over me. Now, I was done. I straightened, adjusting my jacket, and took one last look at the city. Then I turned, stepping back inside, where laughter and success awaited me. I had won, and it was time to enjoy it. As I stepped back inside, the atmosphere of the party wrapped around me like a warm embrace. Conversations flowed easily. Glasses clinked together in celebration, and people who once doubted me now shook my hand with genuine admiration. This wasn't just a housewarming party. It was a statement. I made my way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with colleagues, old friends, and even distant relatives who had barely acknowledged me before tonight. Funny how success had a way of making people pay attention. But there was one person I was looking for. In the far corner of the room, near the grand fireplace, I spotted him, Mr. Langford. A man whose influence in my industry was legendary. He had been one of my parents' idols, the kind of man they would kill to have a conversation with. And now he was here, at my housewarming party. I approached, and as soon as he saw me, his face lit up. "There's the man of the hour," he said, extending his hand. "This place is incredible." I shook his hand firmly. "I appreciate that, Mr. Langford. It means a lot coming from you." He chuckled. "Call me Richard. And listen, I've been hearing a lot about what you're doing with your business. I like it. A lot." That's when he leaned in, lowering his voice slightly. "Let's talk soon. I've got some opportunities that might interest you." I smiled. Opportunities. The kind my parents had always dreamed of. And now they were being handed to me. I glanced toward the entrance for a split second, remembering the look on their faces as they left. They had spent their entire lives telling me I would never make it, that I wasn't good enough, that I would never amount to anything. And yet here I was, not only proving them wrong, but thriving beyond their wildest imagination. I turned back to Richard and lifted my glass. "I'd love to talk," I said smoothly. "Let's make it happen." He grinned. "Now that's what I like to hear." As we clinked glasses, I realized something important. I had been so focused on getting revenge that I hadn't taken a moment to appreciate something far more profound. I wasn't just proving my parents wrong. I was building a life so extraordinary that their opinions didn't matter anymore. And for the first time ever, I truly, genuinely didn't care what they thought. Because my future? It was mine. And it was limitless. The party carried on well into the night. But even as I spoke with my guests, laughed with old friends, and discussed business with people who actually respected me, I couldn't shake a feeling deep in my gut. This wasn't over. Not with my parents. And I was right. Near midnight, just as the last few guests were heading out, my phone buzzed. I pulled it from my pocket and there it was, a message from my aunt. "Your parents aren't okay. They haven't said a word since they left your house. I've never seen them like this. Call me." I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. This was what they did. Every time I stood up for myself, every time I refused to bow to their expectations, they played this game, turning themselves into the victims. They weren't not okay because of what I had done. They were like this because for the first time in their lives, they weren't the ones in control. Still, something in me hesitated. A small, bitter part of me, the part that had once craved their approval, wondered if this was finally it. If maybe, just maybe, this was the moment where they would admit they had been wrong. So, I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I called. The line rang once, twice, then my aunt's voice, tight and anxious. "Thank God. Your parents need to talk to you." A pause, then the muffled sound of the phone being passed, and then, finally, their voices. "You think you're better than us?" I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Of course. Of course, that's what they had to say. No apology, no regret, just more of the same tired resentment. I didn't even let them continue. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. I wasn't doing this anymore. They weren't my problem. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, walked over to the bar, and poured myself another drink. As I took a slow sip, I glanced around the grand home I had built for myself. This was my life now, and they had no place in it. I stood there for a long time, staring at my phone. The call had lasted all of 15 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. "You think you're better than us?" That was their response. Not "we're sorry," not "we were wrong," not even "congratulations." Just that same tired, bitter resentment. And in that moment, something inside me finally broke free. For years, I had been carrying their voices in my head. Every failure, every setback, every doubt, I could hear them sneering, telling me I wasn't good enough, that I was wasting my time, that I'd never be a real success. But tonight, standing in the middle of my mansion, with everything I had built, I realized something I should have known long ago. They were never my judges. I had spent my life trying to prove them wrong, trying to force them to see my worth. But the truth was, they never would. Not because I wasn't enough, but because they weren't capable of seeing it. They needed me to fail because if I succeeded, if I thrived without them, it meant that all their cruelty, all their belittling, all their years of tearing me down had been for nothing. And that? That was something their egos would never allow. I turned my phone over, placed it on the bar, and let out a slow breath. That was it. That was the last time I would ever let them have a place in my mind. A quiet knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see my best friend, Ryan, standing there, an amused look on his face. "You okay?" he asked. I exhaled sharply, then smiled a real, genuine smile. "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally am." He grinned and stepped inside, glancing around the room. "You know," he said, grabbing a glass and pouring himself a drink. "If I were you, I'd be feeling pretty damn good right now." I smirked. "Oh, I do." Ryan raised his glass. "Then here's to you, man. To proving every last one of them wrong." I clinked my glass against his. But as I took a sip, I realized something. I wasn't just celebrating proving them wrong. I was celebrating something far more important. I had finally let them go. And that? That was the real victory. The party had ended. The last guests had left. The house was quiet now, save for the soft crackle of the fireplace and the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. I stood in the grand living room, looking around at everything I had built. The success, the wealth, the life I had carved out for myself, without my parents, without their approval, without their validation. And yet, I felt lighter than ever before. Because this wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore. It never really was. I walked through the house slowly, taking it all in. The high ceilings, the polished marble floors, the carefully curated artwork. Everything here had a purpose, a story, a meaning. Because I had built it not to impress them, not to earn their respect, but for me. For the child they once called a failure, for the young person they never believed in, and most importantly, for the person I had become, stronger, wiser, and free. I picked up my phone one last time, staring at the unread message from my aunt. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it would say. Another excuse, another plea, another desperate attempt to make me feel guilty for choosing myself. I pressed down on the screen, hovered over the contact for a second, then I blocked the number. And just like that, I was done. No more looking back. No more waiting for an apology that would never come. I poured myself one last drink, walked out onto the balcony, and looked over the city. My city. The place where I had built my empire, the place where I had created something greater than they could ever imagine. This was my legacy. And for the first time in my life, it belonged to me. Not them. Just me. And that was all I ever needed. 6 months later, I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline. The morning sun cast long shadows across my desk, where financial reports showed another quarter of exceptional growth. My company had just acquired our third startup of the year, and the board couldn't be happier. My assistant knocked lightly on the door. "Mr. Langford is on line 1, she said. I nodded, picking up the phone. Richard had become something of a mentor since the housewarming party, opening doors I hadn't even known existed. "The deal's going through," he said without preamble. "You'll be the youngest person ever appointed to the National Business Council." I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a small smile. The council was exclusive, invitation only, and comprised of the most influential business leaders in the country. My parents had spoken about it for years, as if it were some mythical place they could only dream of. "That's great news," I said. "I appreciate your support." After we hung up, I swiveled my chair to face the window. Below, the city hummed with life, a constant reminder of how far I'd come. But despite all the success, there was still something gnawing at me, a hollow feeling I couldn't quite name. My phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "Dude, did you see the news?" I hadn't. Opening my browser, I quickly found what he was referring to. My parents' business had filed for bankruptcy. The company they had used to belittle my own ambitions was collapsing. I stared at the screen, waiting for the satisfaction to come. It didn't. Instead, I felt nothing. Not joy, not vindication, just emptiness. I set my phone down and returned to work, but the thought lingered. By evening, after everyone else had gone home, I was still at my desk, turning it over in my mind. Why didn't I feel anything? The answer came unexpectedly, because I didn't care anymore. Their failure wasn't my victory. My success wasn't about them. It never had been. I had just been too caught up in proving them wrong to see it. 2 weeks later, I was having dinner with Elise, a brilliant architect I'd been seeing for the past few months. We were discussing plans for a new community center my foundation was building in the neighborhood where I grew up. "I think we should include a business incubator," she suggested, "a place where people with good ideas but no connections can get their start." I nodded, thinking of my own beginnings. I like that. People shouldn't need wealthy parents or Ivy League connections to have a shot. She studied me for a moment. "You never talk about your family." I shrugged. "Not much to say." "Everyone has something to say about their family," she replied, her eyes gentle but challenging. "Even if it's why they don't talk about them." I looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. "We're not close." "I gathered that," she said. "But it's been 6 months since I've known you, and you've never once mentioned them except in passing." I took a sip of wine, buying time. "They weren't supportive." Elise nodded slowly. "And how is that working for you?" "Fine," I said automatically, then, more honestly, I don't know. 3 days later, I found myself driving through my old neighborhood. I hadn't planned to go there, I hadn't been back in years, but something about my conversation with Elise had unsettled me. I slowed as I passed the modest 2-story house where I'd grown up. There was a for sale sign in the yard. Of course, there was. With the bankruptcy, they couldn't afford to keep it. I drove on, telling myself I was glad. They deserved it after everything they'd done. But as I navigated the familiar streets, memories surfaced, unbidden. Not all of them were bad. There had been moments, rare but real, when they'd shown glimmers of something other than criticism. My father teaching me to ride a bike. My mother staying up all night when I had a fever. Small kindnesses, almost forgotten beneath the crushing weight of everything else. When I arrived home that evening, I poured myself a scotch and stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly before me, a testament to human ambition and frailty alike. I thought about power, how desperately my parents had clung to the illusion of it, and how empty the reality felt now that I had it. What was the point of all this success if it hadn't healed anything? The next morning, I called my lawyer. "I want to buy a house," I said. "It's currently on the market." I gave him the address of my childhood home. "Interesting choice," he remarked. "It's in foreclosure, the owners," "I know who the owners are," I interrupted. "Make it happen, but use a shell company. I don't want them to know it's me." And 2 weeks later, the purchase was complete. I stood in the empty living room where I'd endured countless criticisms, feeling strangely calm. I wasn't buying it out of sentiment or nostalgia. I was buying it because I could, because it represented a chapter of my life I was finally ready to close on my own terms. That evening, a knock at my door surprised me. My assistant hadn't mentioned any visitors. When I opened it, my aunt stood there, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "How did you find me?" I asked, not inviting her in. "Your company isn't exactly low profile," she said. "May I come in?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She entered cautiously, her eyes widening at the opulence around her. "I've been trying to reach you," she said. "I blocked your number." She nodded as if she'd expected as much. "Your parents lost everything." "I know. They're living in a small apartment now. Your father had a mild heart attack last month." I didn't respond. "They're not good people," she said unexpectedly. "They treated you terribly." I should have said something years ago. The admission startled me. I'd never heard anyone in the family acknowledge how they treated me. "Why are you here?" I asked. She handed me an envelope. "They don't know I'm doing this." I found it when I was helping them pack. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping, a small article about a business competition I'd won in college. Next to it was a photograph of me accepting the award, looking young and proud. On the margin, in my father's cramped handwriting, "That's my son." "He kept it," my aunt said quietly. "All these years." I stared at the clipping, emotions warring within me. One moment of pride doesn't erase years of cruelty. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. But I thought you should know it existed." After she left, I sat with the clipping for a long time, trying to reconcile it with everything I knew about my parents. It didn't change what they'd done. It didn't excuse any of it. But it complicated the narrative I'd built, the one where they had only ever seen me as a disappointment. The next day, I called Richard Langford. "I want to start a foundation," I said. "For families in crisis, mental health services, financial counseling, mediation." "Interesting pivot," he said. "Any particular reason?" I thought about the clipping, about the for sale sign, about the emptiness of victory. "Let's just say I've been thinking about legacy." A month later, I sent a letter to my parents' new address. It wasn't an olive branch, exactly. I didn't forgive them. I wasn't sure I ever could. But it was an acknowledgement of the pain, of our shared history, of the possibility that people could be more complicated than the roles we assigned them. I didn't invite them back into my life. I didn't offer financial help or reconciliation. I simply let them know about the foundation and included 2 tickets to the opening gala. I didn't expect them to come. I wasn't even sure I wanted them to. But as I sealed the envelope, I realized something important. I was sending it for me, not for them. Because moving forward meant acknowledging the past, not just escaping it. Because true success wasn't measured by what you built, but by what you overcame to build it. As I handed the letter to my assistant, I felt a weight lifting, not completely, but enough to notice the difference. For the first time since that housewarming party, I was making a choice that wasn't reactive, that wasn't about proving anything to anyone. This, too, was part of my legacy. The hardest part, perhaps, but the most necessary. And as I returned to my office, I understood that the story wasn't over, mine, or theirs, or the complicated narrative we'd created together. There would be more chapters, more choices, more moments of reckoning. But for now, this was enough. A small step towards something that felt unexpectedly like healing. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. But something quieter and more profound, the recognition that I no longer needed their failure to validate my success. And in that recognition was a freedom more powerful than revenge could ever be. What about you? Have you ever felt trapped by someone else's perception of you, or struggled to find peace after a difficult family past? I'd really love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below.